Welcome back. Happy Friday to you. Welcome back to the Combat Footage Show. I'm Ronnie. I'll be your host once again. I'm just checking to make sure I'm not muted. But it's good to see you. Happy Friday. We got a little bit to talk about before we get started on the show. But do me a favor, tap on the like button, drop a comment in the chat. Let us know where you're chiming in from. It's Friday. Welcome back. What do we got here? Sweden, Romania, Canada, Virginia. What's going on? Ohio, OH, Texas, Kentucky, London, Syracuse Oblast. That's funny. I see what you did there. San Antonio, welcome in. Denmark, how are you? Poland, hello from Earth. Same. Twinsies, thank you for the $2, Omero. Pontus, thank you very much for the couple super chats as well. Appreciate you very much. Germany, welcome in. Arizona, Mariupol, how are you? All right, so, again, welcome back. Happy Friday. You made it. You made it a whole week without being imprisoned. And just like the last time I told this joke, if you are in prison, establish dominance. That's important. I want to talk for a moment about tonight's show. Tonight's show is going to be going to have a very wide and broad discretion advised. We've got a couple instances of some very close quarters combat. War will happen tonight. I also wanted to so just be advised. I have done what I can to let you know that we will see the realities of war tonight. But I also wanted to make a note about, technical things here on the stream. I've made a couple changes. I'm hoping that those help relative to the screen issues that I've been having. The backup plan is going to be streaming from that other area, across the room. For those that are familiar with the second stream that I do following this one, you'll know that area, pretty well. If I have to revert to that, we will. It'll just look a little bit different. You'll see, a bunch of guns and a, rocket launcher in the background, all kinds of fun stuff. But let's get the night started. All right. Tonight, we're going to see footage, and once again, I've broken down the footage that we have into some, what I think are key areas. I also have the general Ukraine section. We're also going to talk a little bit about Prigozhin. We're going to talk a little bit about Wagner. And we're going to talk about, and please don't blame me for this, for this one-liner. Blame Cam. Everybody blame Cam. I'd love to see it in the chat. We're going to talk about Prigozhin's fall from grace. More specifically, Prigozhin's airplane falling from the sky. Very first of that, which is the clearest footage that I can find of Prigozhin's airplane falling, is coming up for you guys right now. We're going to talk we're going to spend a little bit of time on this, guys. So, strap in.
Пиздец, это беспилотник. Сбили, бабахнуло 2 раза, взорвалось, падает. Ты посмотри, падает. Блядь. Где, блядь, бабахнет? Куда упал? Вон тут куски летят. Где-то, блядь, упал. Хуя дым пошел какой. А там он куски летят еще. Смотри, какой клуб поднимается. Пиздец. Меня аж трясет. Охуеть. Где это? Блядь, не видать нихуя. Вон. Около фермы. Горим. Не пойму, у фермы нет.
All right, I've got one more angle of this, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, some of the theories that are swirling around right now, some of the historical data points specific to Prigozhin, that I think are relevant to talk about here, but here is an additional angle of Prigozhin's plane as it fell from the sky.
Блять, а куда он падает-то? Ёб твою мать! Бля!
What's notable here, and we're actually going to see some footage here in just a little bit, is we're missing a wing. So if you look really hard, you can see a fuselage there. You can see, you know, the tail of it to a certain extent, and then you can see one wing sticking out the side. But we're missing a wing here. Language. I've rounded up as much of the footage surrounding this as I can, but I think it's important to talk about a couple things. It's important to talk, you know, right out of the gate about kind of the lead up to this incident, what took place here. Prigozhin for the last year has been very vocal with his displeasement of the Ministry of Defense, more specifically Shoigu and Gerasimov, however you pronounce it. This goes all the way back to the initial reports of ammunition shortages that Wagner was experiencing in their fight in Bakhmut. Those are things that I reported, or I shouldn't say reported, because again, I'm not a news guy. I'm trying to provide context. I'm trying to provide context to footage. I'm not a news anchor. But going all the way back to, you know, almost a year ago, if not longer, when I told you guys that there was a rift developing and that Wagner was needing to go at the soldier level, cross level, soldier to soldier, to receive ammo. There have been some that have come out saying Ukrainians didn't meet a single Wagner soldier that didn't have ammo. Well, when you go and look at it from a macro level, in fact, over the course of time, the artillery fires that were falling on Bakhmut started to wane pretty heavily. Fast forward by a few months, and Prigozhin started really heavily speaking out about, in his mind, the mistreatment of Wagner, especially when you look at it, you know, side by side with the treatment of Ministry of Defense soldiers. Prigozhin talked about the lead up to the Ukraine war. He was very specific in saying that the claimed attacks into Donetsk did not happen. First and foremost, these are Prigozhin's words, not mine. Right? I can source any of this data for you. That the attacks into Donetsk that are often cited by pro-Russian accounts just didn't happen. Now, that's not, you know, wholly true. Ukraine has struck into Donetsk, specifically targeting separatist forces from 2014 leading up. But at the scale that it's often cited, you know, especially in the aftermath of Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities. You know, Ukraine has struck into Donetsk since 2014. Prigozhin himself refuted that. Prigozhin screamed at Shoigu. He screamed at Gerasimov. Still always very loyal to Putin, though, leading all the way up to June of this year and his quote-unquote Wagner coup, where it was, where quite a few people, you know, were guessing that potentially Putin and Prigozhin were in cahoots of some kind during this. Putin's initial statements in response to that were very not indicative of being in any form of cahoots. He was very angry. If there's one thing that Putin does very well, it's be extremely calm-tempered when it comes time for him to make a public statement. The initial statements following Prigozhin and Wagner's coup in June were not calm. Now, fast forward. Actually, we want to stay right around here, and actually just prior to the coup. Prigozhin also started to release information relative to the Battle of Kasham. This is something that I tweeted out, where he provided a full, in-depth account of the Battle of Kasham. Now, Ronnie, why the hell does that matter? Well, once again, he was expressing his displeasure with the Ministry of Defense. More specifically, how in his mind the Ministry of Defense left he and Wagner hanging. They were promised air cover. Air cover never came. In fact, in calls between the United States and Russia denied any involvement in the establishment or assault of forces that were attacking a small contingent of U.S. Special Operations forces on the ground. Well, that lack of air cover for Wagner ultimately led to their demise. And then we get here. We get here sometime after the coup, sometime after Prigozhin himself puts out a video that we reviewed on Monday that showed him in Africa. And he, along with, many of his lieutenants, including his number 2, Dmitry Utkin, are on a plane. And the plane goes down. Now, the initial response from that, let's begin to open up the context surrounding this incident itself. So I led you up to now with, a summary, the best summary that I could do, which might not have been that great. That's okay. There are two competing theories. On the one hand, the initial knee-jerk theory and response was anti-air. Now, there is, some evidence that would lead you to believe that that would be possible. There are air defense batteries placed within 50 kilometers of where the plane ultimately lost contact and went down. The second theory, which is actually the theory that's supported by the United States, but the official theory as presented, and we'll see a video about this later, is that there was possibly an explosion from internal on the plane. Now we're going to see some footage coming up here in just a little bit of aftermath. We're going to see that wing that was missing. We're going to see statements from Putin, statements from Zelensky, as well as statements from Pentagon's press secretary. I want to say his name is the Brigadier General. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But let's get started with some of that immediate aftermath footage. So this is the wreckage of the plane immediately following it hitting the ground.
Это крылья, думаешь?
Вон там движок.
Ты думаешь, второй тоже мертвый? На один весь разорванный, а второй тоже? 1795 написано на крыле.
Okay. For some reason, this video is acting funny, but that's okay. We've got plenty more footage to take a look at. We've got some footage of that wing that was missing. Now, there's going to be about 4 videos here. This is approximately 3 kilometers from where the plane itself, the fuselage, along with all the bodies, and more specifically 10 total. 7 were passengers, 3 were crew. This is about 3 kilometers from where those were found. Some more footage for that coming up here in just a second. This is the removal of that wing from that area. Now, Russia's statement on this was that it was very difficult to remove these because of the size. Okay. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you guys the statements, the official statements that came from Putin, that came from Zelensky, as well as, again, the Pentagon press secretary. First is going to be Putin's statement, which I want to say was yesterday. Sometimes I get a little bit confused in my simpleton brain relative to time zones. Just a note for this translation, just prior to this translation starting, he is effectively saying, I've known Prigozhin since the start of the 90s.
С начала 90-х годов это был человек сложной судьбы, и ошибки у него были серьезные в жизни, и добивался он результатов нужных и для себя, и тогда, когда я его просил об этом для общего дела, как вот в эти последние месяцы. Он был талантливый человек, талантливый бизнесмен, работал не только у нас в стране, и с результатом работал, но и за границей, в Африке в частности. Занимался там нефтью, газом, драгоценными металлами и камнями. Вот он, а вчера только, насколько мне стало известно, вернулся из Африки, встречался здесь с некоторыми официальными лицами. Но что точно совершенно, мне об этом докладывал сегодня с утра руководитель Следственного комитета. Они начали уже предварительное расследование этого происшествия, и оно будет проведено в полном объеме.
I want to point out a couple things here. He was an individual with a difficult fate. He both made serious mistakes in life and achieved the results necessary for him for the common cause. Now, there's a video that's being shared around of, one of Putin's statements. He's effectively being asked, can you forgive somebody? He says, yes, but not for everything. And I guess whoever's interviewing him says something to the tune of, what things can you not forgive? And Putin said specifically betrayal. Now, in Putin's response, immediately following Wagner's coup, quote unquote, he said very specifically that it was a betrayal. And I think that's important context. Now let's see what Zelensky had to say about it. That video is coming up for you guys now.
Ви знаєте, коли Україна говорила і зверталась до країн світу щодо літаків, ми не це мали на увазі. Я скажу вам відверто. Ми мали на увазі зовсім інше, і ми хотіли підтримку, хоча, напевно, це також в якомусь сенсі слова точно допоможуть. А що стосується, по-перше, ми не маємо відношення до цієї ситуації. Це точно. Я думаю, всі усвідомлюють, хто має відношення. Ви знаєте,
So, of course, Zelensky positing that this is ultimately Putin's doing here. The last one that I wanted to show you from a statement perspective is from the Pentagon press secretary. Now, like I mentioned, I kind of mentioned this in passing. The Pentagon effectively said that we have no indication or no reason to believe that this was a surface-to-air missile. And to be wholly honest, they would. They would absolutely be able to see that based on some of the indications and warning capabilities that they have. But I will let Brigadier General Ryder be the one to tell you guys that.
We don't have any information to indicate right now. The press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane, that we assess that information to be inaccurate. Again, nothing to indicate, no information to suggest that there was a surface-to-air missile. We don't have any information to indicate right now. The press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane, that we assess that information to be inaccurate. Again, nothing to indicate, no information to suggest that there was a surface-to-air missile.
All right, let's bring that back up. Now, here's where things start to get fucky, right? Because Russia has a suspect already. Now, I'm going to show you this suspect, and the suspect turns out to be the pilot, Prigozhin's pilot. His name is Artem Stepanov. I'll show you a photo of him right now. Now, Artem Stepanov is the owner of MNT Aero. MNT Aero is the company that owns the plane that went down. He was missing at the time of the plane going down, on vacation, some have claimed that nobody has contact with him since, and a second pilot was actually the one flying the plane. Artem Stepanov, Stepanov. So he is Russia's leading suspect right now in the downing of Prigozhin's plane. And again, when you begin to take the Pentagon's statements into account, the likelihood of it not being air defense is relatively high. In fact, the only people that were saying it was air defense was the media immediately following. Right, and since then, there has been a whole lot of confirmation bias type reporting. Look at these little holes on the side of the fuselage that are still, pretty far apart to believe that they'd be fragmentation from any kind of air defense. I'm not an air defense expert, but I wanted to provide you guys with as much of the context as I am tracking surrounding the, again, not my language here, blame Cam in the chat, Prigozhin's fall from grace. And that's what I have for you guys for the Prigozhin plane. Oh, I have one more thing. If you guys wanted to see an internal of the plane that went down, this is a walkthrough of that very specific plane. And I want to say the context here is that they were showing it for sale. Here you are.
Ну, надо будет кожу освежить, конечно. Кожу освежить, конечно, нужно будет. А так, ничего такого.
I'd just like you to know that Cam is actively sending me messages. So please blame Cam as much as possible. Give him a good welcome to the Funker community. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is shift over to Google Earth because we're going to begin our run through of the combat footage that we have. And 3 locations, technically 4. We're going to talk about Robotyne tonight. I know I'm still pronouncing it wrong. That's just, you know, what I'm going to do. We're going to talk about Novo immediately to the south, and some conflicting information that's coming from the area between Robotyne and Novo. I'm calling it Novo. It's a much longer name. I'll probably try and pronounce it a little bit. We're going to talk about Crimea. We'll talk about Bakhmut, and we'll see some footage of Kupiansk. So there's multiple locations there, but very first, we'll talk about Robotyne. Here's the current campaign map from Deep State for Robotyne. Take a look at how the forward line has changed based on footage since we were last here. We were last here on the 21st. Now, Ukraine has reported, and we're going to see footage indicating that they have taken the entirety of the village of Robotyne. And we're going to see quite a bit of footage from this area. And this immediate first section here is going to be the section that I gave you the discretion for right out of the gate. Our very first video, in fact. Very first video coming from the Robotyne area is going to show war. This is the 73rd Naval Special Operations Center conducting actions in and around Robotyne. Discretion advised on this one.
По готовности открываем огонь очередям.
Работаем правее, правее работаем. Стоп, стрельба, пулеметы! Стоп, стрельба! Нормально? Пизда, не б'ється нахуй. Тихо. Не пробило, не пробило. Сука. Не пробило. Откатывайся. Плюс принял. Внимание, все правее. Берем правее блиндажа. Хорош.
Тянете?
Сейчас будет больно, пожалуйста, потерпи, хорошо? Я постараюсь очень нежно. Пару Что, как дела, брат? Как тебе день сегодня? Я вражен. Ты вражен?
Just to give you a heads up on that one. That was an FPV drone. Missed it by that much. All right, let's bring it up. I need to check in on some super chats here, and thank you very much, Parker, for the 20. Thank you, Allie, for the 2. You and the Funker team are doing dope things. We appreciate that very much. We're just here for the footage. Rob, thank you for the $2. Happy birthday, Cam. Yeah, yeah. Today is Cam's birthday. You know, I don't know if that's for certain, but yes, let's do the happy birthday thing for Cam. I've got more footage from Robotyne. Ukrainian infantry fighting on the south, the far southern edge. The last time we saw activity on the far southern edge, it was Monday, and it was primarily Bradleys engaging, some of those engaging at some of those cross streets up ahead of, or not quite to the secondary school. This is going to be infantry that have made their way up there. And a Bradley does end up making an appearance. There's music on this one, though, so I need to keep the sound down. I'll walk you through a couple key things, though. This Ukrainian on the far left here is actually injured. You'll see him applying a tourniquet at one point. Alex, thank you very much for the 50. First and foremost, a sincere thank you to you and the entire Funker 530 team for the well-put-together live streams. Aside from random mutes, that's the intern's fault. Definitely not mine. Vincent is his name. Archiving all this footage. I'm greatly appreciative of what y'all are doing. Thank you very much, Alex. We appreciate you for hanging out with us, and thank you for the 50, sir. So in comes that Bradley to provide support. Ray, thank you for the 249. As always, thanks, bro, and the team. We appreciate you, Ray. Thank you, sir. Ukrainian troopers are already moving on Novo. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. They're not, but we'll talk about that. So that Bradley moved up to engage that house, likely the location that they were taking fire from. Can't really tell on this Bradley if the Brat kit is installed, which would look like a big bump out along the sides of it. Let me know if you guys can see that or not. I'm not as familiar with, some of the visual indicators of the Brat kit. I do know about the side skirt. I know what I'm looking for there, but when it comes to the turret additions, I'm not 100%. We've got more infantry fighting in and around Robotyne. I have this one tagged as a discretion advised. I think this one has deceased visible. I think that's why I have a discretion advised on this one. These are Ukrainian. This is Ukrainian infantry clearing what was reported to be Russian fighting positions around Robotyne. Does that Brad have toes? Yes, it did. Does the Bradley have toe? Yes, it does. Now we're watching a video of a video here. Somebody's cell phone recording of a screen that they're looking at. So quality is going to be impacted. Juju, looks like I missed a super chat from you. Thank you very much for the 10. Someone wanted to buy the jet and took a tour of it. Yeah, I think that was the footage that we watched probably right after you had commented that. I believe this is why I had labeled this discretion advised. Now, just like, was the case last week when Ukraine took Urozhaine, a little bit to the east of the Orokhiv axis. Russia's not sitting idly. Now, they are actively hitting the area with artillery. What you're going to see here is footage that War Gonzo published of artillery hitting the area and a CASEVAC into what I believe is a Bradley taking place on the Ukraine side. Little Spree, thank you very much for the 40. Thanks to you and the team for keeping me entertained on my night shifts, Chief. Always grateful. Thanks for being here. Doing our best to just provide as much context that we have to the footage that's out there. Yeah, that's a Bradley. Where are they going? Probably to some form of a casualty collection point, triage location, somewhere off of the forward line. We saw footage on Monday of what a casualty collection point looks like. It was a hasty one that was stood up. You can have deliberate and you can have hasty casualty collection points. But you'll typically have a location that you can collate all of your casualties in one place, do a quick triage to see who needs higher level care, who needs, just a pressure bandage of some kind. That's more than likely what's happening there. Now, at the end of all of this fighting, the secondary school, which you guys should, for those of you that were here on Monday, recognize, now has a Ukrainian flag flying on top of it. When I first watched this, I actually thought it was a white flag, but I was watching it on a small phone screen. It is the Ukrainian flag flying on that secondary school. So on Monday, and kind of just to read everybody into what I'm speaking to here. On Monday, we watched some pretty heavy Ukrainian strikes hitting this. Presumably it was being used as one of the last areas in the village for the Russians to hole up in. And I can show you on the map exactly where this is. It's on the far southern edge of the village. So we'll go over to the map and we'll take a look just to orient you to where this is, and then we'll be coming back up to see a little bit more footage of the surrounding area of Robotyne. Okay, let's head over, and we're actually going to use Google Earth for this one. So I'll give you the cool zoomy in thing, because small details like that are cool to me. All right, zoom me in. It's very technical. So we'll orient the map north, and you see on the far southern edge of kind of the central area of town is that building we were just looking at there. Here. Now on the outskirts of Robotyne, for those that recalled on the deep state map, Ukraine has advanced all the way up to around this area according to the deep state map. We are about to watch a video compilation of Russian FPV strikes that take place along this tree line out here, kind of providing justification for having the deep state map show those advances that far. That video is coming up for you guys momentarily. Here you are. Now, what's interesting is something that's been kind of prevalent in the information environment is whether or not Ukraine has committed some of its reserve forces. And I think it has, effectively come to light that they have begun to commit some of those reserves, essentially in a much larger push, quote unquote, than historical. There's been a lot of talk about how, quote unquote, long it's taking Ukraine to do this. I'm not sure, what measurement people are doing for, a counteroffensive that takes a long time versus a counteroffensive that's fast. A counteroffensive is counteroffensive. And to say that it failed, like we've talked about before, I think would be false. To say that it has gone, the way of expectations, I think would also be false. If it has failed, it has continued to fail forward. Russia published this footage that they claim shows a heavy allocation, specifically 83 pieces of armor moving towards the Robotyne area. People thought it would be overnight. I agree with that, especially using the precedent of Kharkiv and the counteroffensive there, which ultimately was a rout, just by definition. So all of these lights being what Russia is saying, Ukraine, up to 83 pieces of armor moving towards Robotyne. All right, let's bring it up. Now, to the south of Robotyne, there is a village called Novoprokopivka. I think I nailed that. Probably not. Let me show you. Novoprokopivka. Here. There were some initial reports that Ukraine had actually begun to pressure Novoprokopivka. I'm just going to call it Novo because I'm sure I'm putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable there. But there was a report, and that has been perpetuated quite a bit, that Ukraine is pressuring via infantry and in a mechanized way, in a ground element way, Novo. That report originates from a single Russian telegram, which then, of course, grew legs and has continued to propagate. There is no footage to support Ukraine actively being close outside of generally, it's not far per se. It's 1.5 kilometers away, so everything is relative. But there is nothing to indicate that Ukraine has made it beyond the outskirts of Robotyne just yet. Now, that being said, we've got plenty of footage of them conditioning and attempting at least to move towards Novo. This next video has not been geolocated yet, but it could actually be somewhere close. I'm not certain. I know it is from the Robotyne area, and the initial report stated that they were moving towards Novo.
Дальше, дальше.
Рядом, да, рядом?
Да. А, блядь! 300!
Watch that one more time. We'll start it about right here.
Дальше.
Рядом, да, рядом?
Да. А, блядь! 300!
So for those, that might not be following, he's yelling 300 there to indicate that he is wounded toward the very end. Right here. Now, artillery, or more likely airstrikes from Ukraine, are starting to condition Novo for a presumed and eventual assault. Not unlike we saw in Robotyne. My word, that about blew my eardrums out. Very large boom there. A series of them. Mines everywhere. That's actually something that we talked about on Monday. I would be interested to understand the mine density as you get further and further to the south. And as you breach that first Surovikin line, what is the density of those mines? Especially relative to the density, further to the north that Ukraine has been battering itself against over the last, 2 months, 3 months. For those that might just be joining us, this is a Ukrainian airstrike on Novoprokopivka, which is just 1.5 kilometers to the south of Robotyne, the latest village that Ukraine has taken. Ray, thank you for the 249. Proud being a Funker. Thank you for all the context. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the 249. Pontus, thank you for the 100 sec. My last this month. Happy birthday, Ronnie. Please show the short. They're not that short tonight. They're not that short. So they're kind of pants, to be honest with you. If we're just putting it all on the table, laying it on the table, whatever you want to call it. Little Spree, thanks again for the 40. Let's keep working here. Now, the road immediately to the west of Novo. So this is where things start to get interesting from a shaping fires perspective. Let's take a look at this. So this road immediately to the west of Novo is where these next strikes are going to take place. And specifically, it's hitting a Russian column. Now, if I recall this quality, it isn't the best, but I think it's important to understand and see, especially when you take into account the location. And, again, these shaping fires, conditioning fires, these are the things that you would do to preempt an assault. So this is a Russian column. It's moving along that road immediately to the west of Novo. I would be wearing a pair of silkies, but they're all dirty. So I don't have any. And there's the strike there. Now this vehicle kind of sends it through there. It's important to note that the original report of this, which, I tend to agree with, it's really difficult to ascertain whether, how much damage was done. That second was probably a little bit closer to target than the first. But that's the end of that. We can roll a little bit forward just so you can see the two strikes again and where they impact. So that first one impacts here. Isn't, really anything moving through there. This vehicle kind of drives through it. Continues its way through the impact area. That second round is going to land right next to this vehicle. Which is smart. The more you think about it. This vehicle was already too close to the impact area. It needed to get, move its ass through there. This second vehicle stopping, hopefully, which wasn't reality, hopefully ahead of the impact area to keep yourself from traveling through it. All right, let's bring it back up. Now, further to the south, in Tokmak, I'd say that's probably, southwest-ish. Let's go back to the map. Let's just go back to the map. So we were just up here in Novoprokopivka. So further to the south, in Tokmak, about 20 kilometers to the south, nearing-ish. HIMARS was active in hitting what is reported to be a Russian headquarters. It's worth watching just for the pronunciation of towns. Thanks, Jody. What is that shot from? A drone? It was reported to be HIMARS. And the range, would lead me to believe that that's probably true. Because if we were to go back to the map, and we'll use Deep State for this, because we can actually pull up, different systems. One of the talking points, or narratives, whatever you'd like to call it, that's going around right now is taking Robotyne provided some semblance of high ground, and especially relative to Tokmak, that's true. Zaporizhia in general is kind of an open plain. I shouldn't call it a plain, but it's generally flat. That being said, Robotyne does have a relative elevation increase over Tokmak. Now, for HIMARS, you're not going to roll your HIMARS right up to the forward line. You've got a 70-kilometer range on GMLRS. So as your forward line shifts forward, your support structure to the rear, which could be all the way back up here, is also going to shift forward. A lot of folks, a lot of accounts said, now that we've taken Robotyne, that means that Tokmak is in, range of artillery, and some folks have said it already was. Well, that's not necessarily true, because you're not going to have your 777s run up here right to the front of Robotyne. You're not going to have your HIMARS run right up front here in Robotyne, right? You're going to have those, well behind the forward line, providing some level of support. So it is true that taking Robotyne provided some semblance of high ground. In my opinion, it isn't a whole lot. The difference in variation there is something like 100 meters in elevation variation. But it does provide now the ability for Ukraine to target Tokmak with its 155 millimeter, which is going to include, clusters. It's going to include Excalibur if they have any of that left. We haven't seen an Excalibur strike in quite some time. The 777s, etc. We're going to take things to Crimea next. I'm going to pause for a moment just to check in and make sure I'm all caught up with all the support, which I believe I am. So let's head to Crimea. Along Crimea's western border. Now, this is an area that we've looked at before. And at that time, I think this is an edited video that I put up. We were doing a quick analysis or, a quick breakdown of some of the defenses that were put in place. Right on the beach here. Right along the beach. Plenty of trenches. But we're going to be focused here in this area for just a moment. Now, there was a raid that took place. A Ukrainian raid on western Crimea there. Where a reported SOF element, Security Operations Forces, drove a boat all the way over there and hung a Ukrainian flag. Here is supposedly footage of that raid. Now, we know that this raid took place. That's not why I say supposedly. What we have here is a little bit of he said, she said on what exactly happened when they got there. Ukraine claims that they killed, on arrival, somewhere around 30 Russians. Russia claims to have killed somewhere between 15 and 20 Ukrainians during this. I've got some more footage of wrong button, stupid idiot. I've got more footage of that raid coming up for you now. This one's a little bit longer. It's about 2 minutes long.
Давайте, становитесь рядом с флагом рядом стань, Хама. Гурже в Крыму. Працює з нас. Героям слава.
Ricky says this shows nothing. This is reportedly footage of the Ukrainians on ground in Crimea. Russia has confirmed that this raid took place. The rest of it is black. Now, I've got footage from a different perspective here as well. Again, Russia has confirmed that this raid took place. Really, the question is what exactly happened? There's a likelihood that Ukraine got there, flew the flag, and then left. There's a likelihood that Ukraine got there, and just like they reported they did, they, attacked Russians that were in the area, and Russians took casualties from that. There is also some level of likelihood that Russia inflicted casualties on the Ukrainians. But what's interesting is the way Russia says that they did it. Russia claims that Captain Underwear was the first to respond to the scene and pin down the Ukrainians until a rapid security force was able to arrive. I would have called him Captain Underwear if he was Ukrainian or if he was Russian. So this is supposedly the rapid security force that then arrived sometime later. And I'm gonna be quite honest with you guys. We had a Stand 2 happen in Afghanistan, and I reported to my post wearing basketball shorts, a plate carrier, and my rifle. When shit hits the fan, you get up with whatever you've got.
Назад перемотайте немножко. Сейчас до момента фонарика надо выбросить, подождите. Упадет у него. Он сейчас упадет, раз. Все, назад.
Now, also in this area, though, something that we can see, that we can glean a little bit from, is a strike that took place in the same general area. I'm not going to try and pronounce this one. Cape Tarkankut. Tarkankut. I don't know. An S-400 of Russia's was taken out. That video is coming up for you guys now. So this is, you know, within just a few kilometers of where that raid took place. That was major underwear, by the way. Oh, okay. Big bada boom. Whack and hut. Something like that. Watch that strike again. Now, again, reportedly an S-400. Now, from a range here, that is going to be pretty far. We'll go back to the map. That way we can take a quick look at range on generally where that strike took place versus the forward line. Let's go back to the map here. We'll pull up our handy dandy. First off, let's turn on the fortifications thing. So that raid and everything took place right here in this peninsula. So about 150 some odd kilometers, you know, assuming that there's some form, you know, some level of a buffer of a launch point. You know, if it's out here to the west near Odessa, you're looking up into the 200-kilometer range and beyond. Getting a little closer here, but in Kherson, you know, about 150. If you were to move this point to where, you know, again, having a buffer off of that forward line, your artillery is going to be positioned a little bit further back than that. It's feasible to believe that it could be fired from this area. All right. Now let's bring it up. We're going to be shifting on the map once again. I need to check in on the sport because I saw a couple come over. Super Steve, thank you for the 10. So I'm not a logistics expert, excuse me, but isn't this all playing into China's hands? U.S. sending all our extra ammo and vehicles to Ukraine. What if China decides to invade Taiwan? I think there's a misunderstanding with just how much stuff we have. And this goes back to some of the sources that I've talked about before, like the Kiel Institute. The Kiel Institute is currently tracking by all the way down to the dollar value how much of each country's, you know, equipment they're providing. And we have provided very little relative to what we actually have. It's, you know, somewhere in the 3% range. So when it comes to provisions to Taiwan, Taiwan is still actively purchasing, you know, I say that word specifically, equipment and arms from the United States. Now, when it comes to stockpiles and what we have, you know, what's available, I'm only really going to have what, you know, is reported. And we're also really only going to be basing what's reported off of, you know, the publicly available information for total stockpiles. So if a news outlet, if a mainstream media outlet is reporting that we have 2,000 rounds of 5.56, well, that's just what's publicly reported. We don't necessarily know what we truly have. It's the same thing that applies for Russia. If Russia's known missile stockpiles, for example, cruise missile stockpiles are 2,000, we really only know what is publicly reported. So the amount of quote unquote equipment that's being provided is, you know, kind of barely making a dent. There are absolutely boneyards worth of equipment just sitting idle right now. Now you have to marry that against the reproduction costs, you know, replacement costs, etc. But Taiwan is still actively being armed in case West Taiwan tries to do anything weird. So thank you very much for the 10. I hope that answered at least my perspective on the question. I'm not a logistics expert either. That's important to note. It's just the way I look at that. Baby Draco, thank you for the 20. Love the work, Ronnie. Thanks, or excuse me, send thanks to the rest of the team for me. Thank you very much. All I can say is thank you, guys. Thank you for your generosity. Thanks for just being here. Hit the like button. You can hit the thumbs down if you like too. Just drop a comment in the chat and let me know why you did. Repeatedly. We're going to move on our map now to Bakhmut. Let's head back to the map. Everybody should be generally familiar with where Bakhmut is. But I do like having the fortifications turned on for this map. It's relatively recent that I found out you could do this. And I still don't understand why sometimes these white lines show up, sometimes they're not there. I don't know. It's like a bug or something. Now let's head up to Bakhmut. Here. We're going to see footage today that's not necessarily geolocated, but you know, its initial report was this is where the action is taking place. The action's in the video. The first being from the 3rd Brigade. 3rd Assault Brigade. We've talked about them quite a bit. They release a lot of footage. Headphone warning. All right, yeah. So I've got more from the 3rd Brigade here. This one has a little bit less of a headphone warning. This is their latest that they've published. Also reported to be around the Bakhmut area.
Все, поехали, парни! Сука, убивать не надо. Все, начинайся нахуй. Давай ищи. Нара, рух! Пошел! Танчики, пидоры, вам тут, сука, не жить. Уебаны. Наша посадка. Ебать!
Нет, это наши.
Цыган, понизься, работаю! Шахтарь! Шахтарь, ляж! Иду! Крейте! ПКМ!
На час, туда більше, пущи дерева.
Туда?
Да.
Сука!
All right. Let's bring it up. From a location perspective, again, it hasn't been geolocated yet, but based on historically where the 3rd Brigade has been fighting, you're looking at the Klashivka area, Andriivka, that southern flank of Bakhmut. we've got another interesting one here from the Bakhmut area. I don't have a great geolocation for it, but it's reported to be from Bakhmut and shows some pretty close quarters tank stuff. It's the best way for me to put that. It's a very technical way of explaining it, or of describing it. I don't have a whole lot of time to explain what it means. But it is effectively 2 Ukrainian tanks engaging danger close Russian positions somewhere near Bakhmut. Not yet, V-Dub. We haven't looked at that one yet. That'll be coming up here in 3, 4, 5 more videos. And coax getting after it there. Now, also near Bakhmut. This is one of the videos that I gave you the overarching disclaimer for when we first started the stream, for those that were here for the beginning of the stream. The next video is going to be from generally the Bakhmut area once again. And when I say the Bakhmut area, I mean in and around. You know, I don't have an exact geolocation for this, and I'll always tell you if I do or I don't. Oftentimes, I'll try and actually pull up a map to show you the specific tree line. I don't have one for this, and well, largely because it's a compilation of sorts. This is a compilation reportedly from the Bakhmut area that's going to show a whole lot. Including at one point some extremely close quarters trench fighting. There will be targets visible. There will be deaths on screen. If you are squeamish whatsoever, this is probably not the video for you to watch. That footage is coming up for you guys now. Discretion advised. These are Ukrainians somewhere near Bakhmut. Keeping the sound off, though. All it is really loud music. Now, I want to walk through a couple things here. This is an interesting frame because what you don't get to see is the explosion of this Miklik mine clearing line charge. Coming out right now. That could be a UR-77 or an M58. One of the comments in the chat from Monday is actually, why aren't they using M58s? Well, they are. And this is evident of that. Once again, you know, giving you a discretion ahead of time. This starts to get pretty brutal pretty quickly. Some extreme close quarters there. And once again here. Didn't have a weapon, should have surrendered. Yeah, agreed. Some have posited, you know, there are some accounts. Some have posited that they were surrendering. I would argue that they were running, which, you know, doesn't necessarily make you a non-combatant, right? But some pretty close quarters fighting there. Now we're going to shift things up to Kupiansk. Be moving quite a bit on our map here. You know what? We'll use the search feature. Map's coming up now. All right, Kupiansk here. This is, once again, an area that has been heavily discussed in Russian information circles as, kind of the location of their next advance. Deep State has been very good about making changes to, all parts of the forward line. to include out here in Kupiansk, but, you know, taking you guys all the way back to the last big change that took place was on or around the 12th. That small section. No major changes to the disposition of the forward line, but we've got some footage from the area. I've mentioned in the past that I haven't been seeing a whole lot of footage. The very first is Ukrainian artillery targeting Russian positions. And the way I search for these, just so you guys know, is an overarching city in general. And what comes up, you know, based on the information cutoff times, which are typically stream to stream. So the way that I put the stream together is, you know, things that were published before Monday are not things that we cover now. Things that have been published, not necessarily action that took place, is what we, things that have been published since Monday are what we cover now. Describe that very poorly. Here's that video. So you'll see, you know, based on this recording using a potato, some Russian dismounts moving around here, hit with artillery. Mystical Goat, thank you for the 10 there. War doesn't determine who's right. War determines who's left. It's profound. Thank you for the 10. All right, let's bring it up. More Ukrainian airstrikes from the Kupiansk location. Direction. This, more specifically, though, is targeting Russian equipment. Where's the 4K Ultra HD? Every so often we'll get some really high definition footage, but what we're finding, the general precedent is that most footage gets uploaded and downloaded, then uploaded and then downloaded again repeatedly until we end up finding it. So what that leaves us with is a general potato quality from there. The fastest or the closest we can get to primary sources right now, at least, outside of receiving it direct from those on the ground, which we do have some footage of, is Telegram. You know, if I'm just letting you know where our sources are, that's where we get most of our footage that ends up making its way to the website. And you know, if I'm being honest, this stream is mostly comprised of Twitter footage. It's the fastest way for me to collate that. And there's a possibility in the future, given Twitter's new live features, that we will be dual streaming, you know, here and on Twitter. It's something that I'm still considering doing. So that's what I have for our, you know, location-based footage. We're going to move into a section of the stream that I call the general Ukraine footage. This means that it's from Ukraine, but I don't necessarily have a great location where. This very first one is actually a little bit longer of a video, but I think it's a good one to watch. Now, when cluster munitions were initially announced for Ukraine, one of the reasons that Ukraine was asking for cluster munitions, because again, under the majority of circumstances, at least based on what I understand, Ukraine is asking for the equipment they receive, right? They will ask for certain things. They might receive it. They might not. They have been turned down on certain things before. But one of the reasons they asked for cluster munitions wasn't necessarily just to use it in its traditional capacity, but it was to use it as submunitions for drone drops. Now, I have thoughts on this. I have opinions on this. And to be honest with you, I don't find an issue with it, really, whatsoever. Just given the prevalence of drones, the capability increase of drones, both for Russia and for Ukraine, the economy of scale of using drones in both a forward observation capacity as well as being able to just generally accomplish with one drone what sometimes would necessitate 5, 6, 7 rounds of artillery. And Ronnie, what do you mean? 5, 6, 7 rounds of artillery is a huge explosion. Yeah, it's generally inaccurate. So when you think about it from a scale perspective, from an economy perspective, the accuracy relative to the cost of using a drone is much higher. So the use of submunitions from a drone Here it is. Cope incoming? Where was the cope? What cope?
От у нас є снаряд з великою кількістю 80 штук суббоєприпасів всередині. Зараз його спеціальна людина буде пиляти. Мені вже лячно.
Сантиметра 4.
Від пояска цього.
Пояска, да. Тому що тут іде ще пластина. Не так красиво буде. Ай, які галічки.
Отут вони суббоєприпаси стоять. Це в нас голова з кришкою. Оце суббоєприпаси.
No fuse. Yeah, they probably removed it before they started cutting into it with a wheel. They're pulling out those submunitions now.
Так, зводимо ми, знімаємо чеку. От вона знялась. Ми її не викидаємо. Розпускаємо. Все, ця планочка, дивимося внимательно. Я починаю крутити.
Поднимается.
Вона переводиться в бойове. Все. Зараз воно в бойово. Щоб поставити в безпечне, заводимо назад всю планочку. Соответственно, назад ставимо цю чеку.
Как она ставится?
Так же само, як і вбиралась.
Просто защелкивается и все, да?
Да. Все. Вона в безпечному. Тут ще, дивіться, є дві дирочки, можна гвоздика вставити.
I see a question in the chat that I kind of want to speak to. You know, is this safe for somebody that's trained to handle them or that has a strong understanding of how to handle them? Yes, because you know you obviously are going to need somebody that puts them together. But what really isn't is any of these that get left over. The failure rate on submunitions is actually quite a bit higher than what is publicly understood. Now, these things can end up just, being left on the ground. Some of our team members have, in fact, lost team members to leftover submunitions from U.S. strikes in Iraq specifically. So once these are fired and activated, handling them at that point becomes very risky. Can that be used as a grenade? That's exactly what's about to happen.
Да, воно не кожен буде розстрілювати, чисто про цьому. Ну і все. Готово. Це не натягнути, голочці нічого не буде мішати. За потреби завжди ще можна підтягнути. Підтягнути, да, оці очі стабілізуючі шнурки. Все, знімаємо один. Бачите, не відстрілює. Тобто треба буде ворухнути.
So what he's doing here, if I understand correctly, is arming.
Ні, це вже, хочете протримати, хочете ні.
Why not a grenade? What's the advantage? There is actually an advantage to these. So this would be either the M42 or M46 submunition, if I'm not mistaken. Please don't quote me on it. Now, this submunition is going to have both anti-armor, light armor from a light armor perspective, and anti-personnel properties. There's a small shape charge in there, and the casing around the submunition is designed to fragment. So that means that you can use this against, light armored vehicles, or you can also use it against, clusters of infantry.
Навіть по штатці, наскільки я знаю, сапер не положено на... От в мене відділення, да, в мене саперний водій положено, сапер не положено.
Що я тоді водій, блядь, і сапери слідувати?
Ну так воно ж так у всіх, хлопці. Воно так у всіх, все. Уже зведений. Да, ось, твоя системка, дивись.
Now, you're also going to have kind of an added benefit here, just by nature of the submunition. The submunition is used to being dropped by, artillery shells. That you can drop this from, you don't have necessarily a timer, per se, like you would with an F1 grenade or an RGD or M67. You've got that timer. M46 submunition. I'm assuming that's what that's saying there.
Йдемо далі дивитися, що в нас вийшло з двох. Один боєприпас був кумулятивно-осколковий, інший кумулятивний чистий. Кидали в яму, там лежить картончик. Зараз подивимося, що у нас по ураженню.
John, thanks for the 20. I'll cover that one after the video here.
Ну, тут насправді чітко видно, що це був кумулятив, бо чисте пробиття, а це був кумулятивно-осколковий. Його трішки
I'm not a BDA guy here, but, I talked about some of the anti-personnel and I shouldn't say anti-material, but light anti-armor properties of the M46. Again, don't quote me on it, because there's a difference between the M42 and M46. But if I am not mistaken, they have both light anti-armor capabilities via a shaped charge inside, and the shell, the casing of this, is actually designed for primary fragmentation. Now, you're also going to have secondary fragmentation. The difference between primary and secondary fragmentation really being primary is built into the device itself. It is meant to fragment. It is meant to, people would call it shrapnel. Shrapnel was a dude. Fragmentation is what hits you. Then you have secondary fragmentation, bone, rock, wood, other stuff that gets kicked up in the explosion. I did a deeper dive video on this. This was a few months ago at this point, on cluster munitions and some of the capabilities of the different types of submunitions. You can find that in one of our playlists down below. There was a question that came across the chat. It's kind of a softball of a question and a little bit outside of my expertise, but I'll give you my thoughts on it. John says, probably too complex of a question. What's your professional assessment? I don't know if it's going to be professional, of what the end goal is with this war. And what do you think it all looks like a year from now? Are we in World War III by then? Question mark. Do the aliens show up finally? Well, they damn well better. I think it's statistically not possible that there aren't aliens. Do you think about how big the Milky Way is? And I mean, statistically, it just wouldn't make sense. So, somebody needs to start telling us something. And, I'm actively interested in that at a personal level. Relative to the war, I think from a United States perspective, this next election is going to be very telling. And how exactly whomever takes over the United States presidency handles continued support and aid to Ukraine. I did watch the debate. I'm not going to get political here, but there was really only one candidate that expressed a desire to slow or cease the support to Ukraine. Should the support to Ukraine slow, really whatsoever? I personally, this is my opinion. This is not Funker 530's opinion. This is mine. I personally don't think that Ukraine continues to be able to mount the offensive that they have been. I think the fighting spirit remains, but I think the amount of support that the United States has provided, without it, Ukraine will not ultimately succeed in whatever Ukraine's goal is. So that's another important piece. There could become a point in time where Ukraine decides that they have come to a point where they can concede, where they will, where they are willing to come to the negotiation table. And I don't mean concede by concede territory, I mean potentially concede membership to NATO, concede trade in some way, or economics. So concession doesn't necessarily mean what you might think there. But ultimately what matters most is that it's Ukraine's decision. You know, people talk a lot about the West blocked Ukraine from negotiating. It's absolutely not the case. Russia, you know, tried to bring the United States to the negotiating table, and we said no. Right? We said no, there's no negotiation without Ukraine. Now, Zelensky has said very specifically, we will not concede territory for this. So I think there is a lot that, you know, unfortunately for Ukraine, that hinges upon the, you know, whomever is elected president of the United States. Just given the bulk of support that has been provided, and that makes you even think about things deeper. Given ratios and the amount of support that the United States has provided, just the United States, and we still have yet to truly dent in any, you know, impactful fashion our own stocks. Just how capable the United States military is. The military, from a combat power perspective, right? I'm not talking about decision making, because that's how we ended up with the situation exactly 2 years ago tomorrow in Afghanistan. A failure in decision making, top to bottom. Well, I shouldn't say top to bottom. Those executing on the ground absolutely made the right decisions. But at the top level, both executive and military leadership failed in Afghanistan. They allowed the Taliban to be an outer, and in some cases an inner cordon. They wouldn't allow the team that was on the ground to engage the known threat that they saw prior to the explosion. They got back on the bird with some kind of a political statement saying, look, our general or colonel, whoever it was that got off of it, is the last to leave. Well, you weren't the last to leave. There's still the blood of 13 people on the ground that are still there. This is exactly 2 years ago, as of tomorrow, August 26th, 2021. We failed the boots that were on the ground. We failed our partners. We failed our allies. We had a perfectly defensible Bagram airfield, just a few miles away from Kabul, but we chose to use a civilian, wholly undefensible airport to manage that evacuation. And to this day, no accountability. I kind of went off on a rant there. We've got some more footage from Ukraine coming up here. Another, though, I probably didn't answer your question because it's kind of a, you know, much broader question than I think I'm qualified to answer. Just trying to own what I'm capable of answering and not. This video, recognize the thumbnail, is an interesting one. Now, this was released by a team on Twitter. I want to say they are American, but could possibly have Ukrainian military contracts. So not every American is part of the Foreign Legion. That's an important distinction that everybody really needs to understand. You know, it's not unlike, you know, somebody with Mexican citizenship, you know, serving in the United States military. But this was released on Twitter. And the report that comes along with it is that this team had made their way behind Russian lines. And a pair of retreating Russians moves, you know, in what they believe is to the rear, to safety, when in fact they're moving right smack dab into a team of Ukrainians, or at least Ukrainian fighters on behalf of Ukraine. Here's the footage. Discretion advised. This is, you know, target close. I'm not playing the song, though. Now, if I understand the report that, you know, the original source to this claimed, this guy actually ran all the way back here, kind of realized his mistake, and then ran all the way back the other direction into the other Ukrainians. But this is the only bit of this footage that we have. One more time. So he's engaging close, hits one of the two. The second one, it looks like he doesn't engage any further because he's unarmed. Okay. Let's bring it back up. Yeah, so again, I don't think I answered your question right away because I don't think anybody truly has an answer for that. I think we can derive what Putin's original goals were based on the initial invasion, right? To really say anything otherwise would be technically doing Russia a disservice for what they were able to accomplish early on. They were within 20 kilometers of Kyiv. So to say that their original goal wasn't a takeover, you know, forced capitulation by taking Ostomel, using that as a launching point for engaging into Kyiv rapidly, you know, inside of weeks and having it finished. What they didn't account for was, you know, the delaying action that took place at Hostomel. There's a really good article that I tweeted out not too long ago that describes the Battle of Hostomel. They didn't account for the delaying action that took place at Hostomel that kept them from taking that until it was ultimately destroyed by Ukrainians and rendered unusable. They didn't account for the amount of collective Western support, I don't think. There were sub goals of establishing the land bridge between Crimea and the Donbass. If at some point Ukraine does reverse course and believe that that giving up some of their land is the best path forward, then that's what they determine it to be, right? Ultimately, it's nobody else's business, I shouldn't say business, or job to say what Ukraine should be doing other than Ukraine. You know, the fastest path to this ultimately, or to that end state in my mind, is for Russia to stop, turn around and go back. That's just me. You know, I'm not necessarily pro-Ukrainian. I'm just not anti-Ukrainian. It's just, you know, how I personally, and this is me, this is Ronnie. My name is Ronnie Adkins. Spell it right when you write your congressman about it. Not necessarily the rest of the team's thoughts. Anyway, I got one more bit of footage for you guys tonight. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your support. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate you guys for being here. It means a lot. I love the questions. I'll always answer them to the best of my ability with my thoughts. They're not going to be some profound, you know, deep, philosophical, you know, thought. It's just how I process things, because I'm the footage guy. I'm here to show you footage. And we saw a lot of footage tonight. We saw some tough stuff. We saw some assaults. Ukraine has continued to take more and more territory over time. Those initial few videos of the invasion, or excuse me, not invasion, but counteroffensive, showed them banging their heads against a mine wall. And I suspect that the further and further they get to the south, the less dense those minefields will be. But then again, you don't know what you don't know. I do have one more video for you relative to drones specifically. And I'd like you to remember that apes together strong. Sometimes first-generation warfare is what you need to combat fifth-generation warfare. I'm going to give you this. It's going to automatically redirect you over to the other stream. If you'd like to come by and, you know, we could talk a little bit further, we'll see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you back here Monday, 6 o'clock Eastern Standard for more footage. Good night, and stay informed.
Ова, в боку. От або в'їби, або не в'їби. Ова, в боку. От або в'їби, або не в'їби.
For those wondering, this is the drone defuckery device, model M69, NATO standard. Good night.